Good evening. Thank you all for coming and thank you for bearing with us. Actually, I thought it was a great moment for people to sort of catch up because most Wednesdays we're just running from one meeting to another and there's hardly a moment where we actually can talk to each other. Thank you very much for the tech support as well. Now, I'm not going to waste any more time. And I'll start directly with introducing our speaker for tonight, our very beloved colleague, Dr. Filippo Cervelli. Filippo did his first degree in German and French, I think.
English.
English, sorry. German and English at the University of Florence, and then came to the UK to do a PhD at the University of Oxford. And I understand that a part of the PhD research has gone into the talk today. He has widely published and translated some of the work of Oe and Abe Kazushige.
Yeah.
And has also co-edited a special issue of the journal Exchanges about the lonely nerd, something that many of us, I think, No, I didn't mean to say that many of us identify something that many of us will read and maybe think, oh, this is a good thing to teach with. So today's talk bears the title Immediacy in Contemporary Japanese Literature and Popular Culture. And without further ado, I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabio, for the very kind introduction. Thank you all. Thanks for bearing with us, both online and in person. It is a pleasure for me to be able to talk about my book here at the JRC. It is actually very serendipitous because very early on when I started at SOAS, I was given the opportunity to present as the JRC, and I did a presentation on literature on Takahashi Genichiro, a Japanese writer, who is actually somebody that features heavily in my book. So much of that work went into the final book that I'm presenting today. So I thought that I'm sure many of you still remember the talk of 6 years ago, so I will not repeat myself on Takahashi, and today I will talk about some other parts of the book. So which I'm happy to present today. This was published kindly by Routledge in March of this year. And now we are discussing for film adaptation with a very big American company. We are in talks. Pedro Pascal might play myself, so I'm very happy about that. So without further ado, I will start with my slides. Okay. So very roughly, I will explain the main hypothesis underlying my work. My book is what we would call a thematic analysis. So it is interdisciplinary because it is on literature, on some social criticism and popular culture in contemporary Japan. So it is the application of a hypothesis that is called immediacy through through critical contexts in Japan, on media mostly, and society, but then applying that to literature, to many authors in literature, and also manga and anime. So it is informed by my doctoral work that has been expanded, reworked, edited, adapted. So it is the culmination of a journey that started quite a few years ago. Immediacy is something, right, that we can understand in many ways. It is something that is immediate, unmediated, direct, right? But for the purposes of my book, I mean it as an emphasis on the present. It's something that in Japan would roughly translate to sokujise, so being exactly on the time, on the moment, which I intend as general emphasis on the present moment as a series of instances that follow one another but do not really inform each other. So throughout my research, I found that in many narratives across media, across very different milieu of the writers, there were recurring traits of many narratives where this emphasis on the moment was prevalent, and that happened at the expense of clear-cut, clearly demarcated notions of time, meaning notions of the past, where are we coming from, both personal and collective, but also of an optimistic view into the future. So with the future and the past being effaced in the characters' awarenesses, what remains is only the present. So in many of these narratives, I found different treatments that somehow were concomitant in showing a supremacy of the present. Characters that were living their lives just surviving an incessant, an endless loop of present moments. So the framework that I advance in my book is the lens of immediacy that touches on four main points that are recurrent in many narratives. So one is a repetitive and never-ending present. So the characters in the stories that I have looked into act on the moment, but they do not really achieve long-lasting development. So it's more about survival, both literal and figurative. And it taps into theories of presentism that I will talk about in a minute. All of this emphasis on the present has a precondition that is what I would call ideological vacuum. So the characters are not guided by any big ideologies of what prosperity should be, dreams of material happiness. So this is why all the narratives that I will be talking about are very contemporary, right? So we are talking about the 90s, we are talking about the early 2000s, right? So after many events that happened in Japan and around the world that had shattered notions of time. And we will see them in a little bit more detail in a second. So the characters are left without coordinates on their past and their future. So they just react to what is in front of them in the present without really thinking critically what is going on. So it's mostly reacting to stimulations, and these stimulations can be very carnal and very violent. So usually it's a response to stimulation for violence and also sexual and intercourse sexual stimulation. So there is a lot of violence and deviant sexuality in the book. And so all of this, if we understand that the characters only focus on themselves and react on their own immediate reality, a reality that is not the whole world, is only what they find in front of them, of course, this isolates them because it's a kind of everyone for themselves, basically, a kind of trying to outlive somebody else because otherwise they will devour you, or you have to react and survive in the moment. So there are no long-lasting solutions, there are no structured solutions, but the characters are isolated often because they only act on the moment. So in many of the narratives that I analyze in my book, the characters are somehow feeling a lack in their stories, because if they only survive in the moment, they only act in the moment, they are isolated. In a way, there is a lingering, tantalizing possibility, a yearning for a community, for a human bond, for managing to feel somebody that connects us with somebody else. It is not just, okay, I want to survive, I want to survive and do what is good for me. So the narratives make us think that in the end, the way to escape the fetters of this repetitive, never-ending present is actually a full understanding and confrontation with others. So when I speak of presentism, I'm drawing on a body of scholarship that is between philosophy of time and history and discourses on the end of history. So one of the most interesting theories that I found in my work is the idea of presentism, which is something that has been theorized by a few scholars. One of the most famous one is François Hartog, is a French historian who wrote Régime d'historicité, Regimes of Historicity, in 2003, and was published in 2015 in English. But then also there are other scholars that connect the presentism to neoliberal policies and things like that, and so Traverso and others. So Artaud wrote that now in the post-Soviet Union world, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we're living in a time of presentism where somehow no long-lasting solutions are seen at any level of society. So he wrote that political leaders are required to rescue the euro, for instance, or the whole financial system for that matter every month or so. And this raises an even more fundamental problem. Our old representative democracies are beginning to realize that do not really know how to adapt their methods of rhythms of decision-making to the tyranny of the immediate. This is an expression that I use a lot in my writing in the book, which is basically epitomizing the tyranny that we have to somehow do something over and over and over without achieving any long-lasting solutions. And Artaud wrote that in the early 2000s. This idea also resonates with writings by Frederick Jameson, who has written about everything, and also including this. So he wrote that it is let's say, a consequence of the postmodern world that the time has been reduced to the present and the physicality of the body, because if we do not have clear coordinates of the past and the future as a community, the only things that we can focus on are what we can empirically touch or feel, so which is our own body. So he writes that in this new dialectic of omnipresent space and the living or temporal present, history, historicity, the sense of history is the loser. The past is gone. We can no longer imagine the future. And in the Japanese literature and popular culture that I have analyzed, this resonates throughout. The sense of history is completely obliterated. The characters do not have a clear sense of their community, of where they're coming from, of a shared past. Even in an anime that I have studied in my book, Psychopaths, in this dystopic society, history is canceled. So it's been deleted. They don't teach that at school anymore. So you can find purged records only in universities, right? As for the time frame of my analysis, I have analyzed narratives and theories that more or less that are circumscribed and demarcated between 1995 and 2011. As usual, we always have to find conventions and compromise with dates. But for my analysis, it makes sense because according to Artaud and other scholars, this effacement of the categories of time coincides with epochal events in society that do turn upside down the perception of time for people. So for Artaud in the, let's say, Western world or non-Japanese world, these events correspond to the fall of the Berlin Wall, the rise of neoliberal policies, and so on and so forth. For Japan, there is a body of scholarship that isolates the mid-90s, especially 1995, as a sort of comparable year of a certain annus horribilis. For what reasons? One is the impoverishment, the burst of the bubble economy, which did not happen in 95 per se. We know that the land asset prices had been falling for a while, but it is 1995 that many have seen as one of the years that sanctioned the regulation of employment in Japan, like moving from stable, permanent workers to the increasing employment of temporary workers. This from the economic point of view. From other points of view, we had two major disasters in 1995 that, again, did affect the feelings of society. One is the Kobe earthquake or Hanshi-Awazi earthquake, which caused more than 6,000 deaths in the area of Hyogo. If you like Murakami Haruki, he also wrote about that in his books. There is no Murakami Haruki in my book. There is a little bit of Murakami Haruki in my book, but so not as a main case study. And the other one was man-made. It was the sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway in March 1995. So these bombs were detonated during rush hour on the subway in Tokyo between Nagatacho, Kasumigaseki. So these are all the areas where the government buildings are, and the National Diet Library, as we all know very well. And so this attack was associated with the cult organization Omu Shinrikyo, this cult organization that recruited a lot of very affluent young Japanese that were disenfranchised and disillusioned, and they predicted a sort of incoming Armageddon, and one of the only ways to survive was to stick to the tenets of Shinrikyo. I'm super oversimplifying this, but for the purpose of my hypothesis, this event was a shocking event because it turned upside down the reality of people. People were going to work like every day, and they could die. So for many Japanese, it felt like a bit like manga teki genjitsu, so like a manga-like reality, something that could happen in manga. And the person in the picture is the leader, Asahara Shoko, who was executed, I think, how many years ago? 2008, something like that. Anyway, he was the leader of the cult organization. 1995, the sarin gas attack, of course, was a shocking event in Japanese society, and of course it also engendered a lot of theories and responses. One of the most famous theories that have stuck even now is the idea of the endless everyday that was put forward by the sociologist Miyadai Shinji, who has written pretty much about everything in contemporary society. He also wrote about otaku, manga, anime, and is one of those very interesting people like Saito Tamaki that write many things, and they're very interesting. He wrote in his 95 book, Owarinaki Nichijou, a manual to survive, the endless everyday, a manual to survive Om. He wrote that the sense of an ordained reality after 95, after the sarin gas attacks, were shattered. So for him, the youth that were growing up in those years, they found their sense of stability in the world shattered. And so for him, a way for them to cope in a society that was very opaque, they didn't understand what was going on, they didn't understand what they should do in life, what their dreams were, how they could succeed. They ended up finding solace in daily repetitive activities. So doing the same thing over and over and over, even with differences, but without a grand plan, was something that was inevitable for many young people at the time. For Miyadai, the main case study was the phenomenon of dating with compensation in Jokosai at the time. If you've seen the film Love and Pop, I think is in English, by Anno Hideaki, is a very good movie about this phenomenon. So for those of you that don't know it, it was this practice mostly of young high schoolers at the time to go out with older men just to get some money out of it. So even to entail sex, but not all the time. It was a practice that went on. And it was, for Miyadai, this practice was a symbol of this youth. For him, it was inevitable. It was a way that somehow they could go on with their lives. So there is this, right? And these thoughts of having to go on with your life by acting endlessly and repetitively without thinking about what you're doing that much is something that we find in Japanese thoughts and criticism and commentaries quite a lot in the last 20 years. Like, so at the other extent of my research is from 95 to more basically 2011, because I thought I saw it as another comparable event with the triple disasters, the tsunami, the nuclear fallout in Fukushima, as another earth-shattering apocalyptic event that would reinforce these feelings of time, of course. And there are many narratives in this almost 2 decades that speak to my hypothesis, right? So even after that, we see, however, commentaries that society is really not thinking. They're just reacting to news without thinking what is good for people, what is the greater good. And even in later commentaries that, however, do refer with the nuclear problem, the nuclear issues that were raised after 2011 in Japan on the use of nuclear energy, should we dismantle the nuclear plants and so on and so forth, many demonstrations to which also my beloved Oeken Zaburo participated. So as a snowball in the wake of those commentaries, of those issues, a writer and political commentator, Takahashi Genichiro, in his essays, does reflect on these issues. So he says that people in Japan don't really think about long-standing issues. They choose not to see, right? Did we really think about the significance of creating nuclear energy, or about the aging or decreasing population? Although we noticed vaguely that these issues represented problems, didn't we just not think kangenai? Kangenai koso ga tsumi. The real sin is not to think, right? How they would be related to our future, captivated as we were by our daily lives. Should that be true, then perhaps we too are responsible for the banality of evil. In this essay, Takahashi is referring to Hannah Arendt, the philosopher who wrote about the banality of evil for the Eichmann trial. So he follows Arendt insofar as saying that it is evil not to think about issues, about doing things just because somebody tells you to, or because a politician says that this is important. And these commentaries by Takahashi speak of suspension of thought, shikoteishi in Japanese, which is another tenet of my lens, of my hypothesis. And it also refers to sort of a buzzword of debates in Japan in the 2000s, this idea, there is scholarship, there is mention of this suspension of thought, shikoteishi, like not thinking about the big things in society, right? So I summarized what I'm working with as a lens. So now I would like to talk a bit more about the other chapters of the book. This is the structure that I have. I have 5 chapters, including the epilogue. The introduction in the book is mostly it analyzes more in detail what I've been talking about until now. Then I have a chapter where I look at Immediacy's outings in contemporary theories on popular culture, on media. Then there are 2 chapters that are literary. One is devoted solely to Takahashi Genichiro, who is this writer, postmodernist writer, who I've been working on for a long time. And then we have another chapter in literature, diversifying the body of analysis, and then a part on immediacy in popular culture, which is the chapter that I will look into in more detail today. Of course, I cannot cover everything, unfortunately, for you and me. And also to show that my book is thematic. So the analysis shows that this immediacy is something that pervades the Japanese fiction and cultural commentaries across status of the writers, across age groups of the writers, across gender of the writers, and also across media, because I also have popular culture. So in contemporary culture, I touch on these very interesting people. So we have the very famous Azuma Hiroki on the lower left corner, who is a critic of everything, right? Bunka Hyoronka, so like a cultural critic. who has written about animation, Sekaike. He published a very seminal study on otaku in the early 2000s, otaku Japan's database animals, and he looks at otaku as a quintessential purveyors of culture now in Japan, that they, in a very presentist immediacy way, they consume recurrent elements in anime, manga, and video without looking at the big picture, without needing the big picture. They like to consume different reworkings of familiar elements, such as the cute girl, the one that is in need of attention, the robot, the yandere, or things like that. Uno Tsunehiro is also a counterpoint for Azuma in many ways. He wrote a very interesting book, Zero Nendai no Souzou Ryoku, so the creativity of Generation Zero. And he analyzes works in popular culture and draws the thoughts of society from them. Then I have something on the superflat theory in art by Murakami Takashi, the artist of the daisies. And also Kumashiro Toru, he is a psychiatrist who has written profusively about the rejuvenation depression in Japan, wakari zukuri utsu. So meaning that in Japan, many workers think that they have to be young indefinitely, even at 50s and 60s, they have to work like they were in their 30s and 20s, which is interesting for immediacy because it does show that there is no progress for them. There is no idea of aging. He said, Kumashiro says, the Japanese now do not know how to age, right? They don't know what old means or not. So you can agree with it, you cannot agree with that, but it was very useful for me to see that there are many theories that participate to my discourse. A few things on Takahashi, who is the main author under analysis in the book. Takahashi is a postmodernist writer. He has written many things, articles, short stories. He's a political commentator. He has even directed a pornographic film. He has been married 5 times, I think. So many people say that in order to pay alimonies, he has to do a lot of things. And he's an author that has a very good knowledge of world literature, which is something very rare now in contemporary literature in all the world, not only in Japan. And he has written many insightful works of literature that resonate with immediacy that I analyze in detail in my book. So he's a very experimental author. His works don't usually have a plot, so they are not that super easy to read. They're fun because there is a lot of humor. And I think here I have one of my former students who actually wrote an essay on Takahashi, had the courage to do that. I was very grateful for that because when I give essays, nobody usually wants to write on Takahashi. Also because he's not very well translated, as you can imagine. But in his works, he writes a lot about these emphasis on the moment, the survival on the moment, characters that have sex very violently just to satisfy their urges. So sex is never a communication. And there is also a lot of violent intersecting temporal planes. So for somebody that was interested in looking at anachronisms and time that is in a loop and time that doesn't make sense, his works were a treasure trove. Not the easiest thing to read, however, but I was young, I was a young researcher, so I went through all of them. These are some of the things that I talk about in my book. Probably the most well-known is this one, Nihon Bungaku Sei Suishi, which is a very thick novel that basically elaborates the history of Meiji literature, Meiji and Taisho, so from late 19th century to the early 20th, with real characters and writers, Natsume Soseki, Moriogai, and Tayama Katai, and many others, with anachronisms in the present. So there is a chapter where the narrator, the writer Takahashi, is hospitalized with an ulcer, and the patient next to him in 2001 is Natsume Soseki, who had been dead for 90 years, maybe something like that. So it's something like that. We'll just give one example from Takahashi's literature that hopefully can show you the pervasiveness of immediacy. So this is a short story about a guy who only reads pornography. He doesn't do anything else, and he satisfies himself, let's say, reading pornography. So there is one point where the man is actually interacting with somebody else that is not his own appendages. And there is also a moment, a very brief moment, where he has an epiphany and he starts thinking not only about himself, but about some other people, right? There is a glimpse of critical confrontation, but it doesn't last. So the phone rang, the man picked up the receiver. Again, it was the usual woman's voice. You can get drunk, but you're going to end up with a weird one for sure, she said with an incredibly sexy voice. Thank you for your advice. The man hung up the phone and opened a pornographic book. It's kind of strange, the man thought. Something around me is moving forward. The man lifted his gaze from the porn book and tried to think about it. Kangairu, it's a very important verb, right? Because they never do it in these narratives. It was the first time in his long life that the man had ever taken his eyes off an open porn book. However, sadly, the man had no idea what he should think about, or rather, until that point, he had never attempted to think about anything. So he went back to the pornographic book. So, right, this is the only epiphany that we have in the story, right? So to give you an idea. In chapter 3, I continue the analysis and literature, and I diversify things a bit more. We have the most famous book by Takahashi, The Nuclear Plant in Love, Koizuru Genpatsu, which was the first novel to be published after the Fukushima incident and the tsunami in 2011. And it is a very plotless, crazy book about a film crew that shoots a pornographic book, a movie, and the proceedings will be used for charity. So it's a crazy story about how we can mourn the people that we have lost. Like, it is a very interesting book because it challenges our ways of thinking about the dead, the ways in which we mourn that are not officialized. Then we have one novel by Taguchi Randi, this lady here, Outlet, which again deals a lot with sexual stimulation and acquiring a higher awareness of oneself. And then Hirano Keiichiro. Hirano is a very famous author now in Japan. He has won many, many prizes. I don't think that, however, he has been studied by academia that widely. He's also published on Mishima Yukio, the famous writer, whose 100th anniversary from his birth we are celebrating. So he's very well engaged with the literary world, but he has also published best-selling novels that have been adapted. So he's read widely, but not studied that widely, at least in English, or even in other languages that I know. So if you're looking for some scholarship on Hirano, that's the book you want. So now I will talk a bit more in detail about the popular culture chapter that I have, which analyzes immediacy in 2 anime series and 1 manga. The first series that I worked on is Neon Genesis Evangelion, which needs no introduction, I think. And also it plays very well because we're going to have an event on Evangelion next month here at SOAS, which is for celebrating the 30th year from its original release. Evangelion is a robot anime series where in a dystopic future where the Earth has gone through cataclysmic events that have basically destroyed its ecosystem. So it's summer all year long, and humanity are constantly attacked by very strange aliens of whom we don't know nothing. And it broke new ground, this series, because it bought into a long-standing tradition of a robot anime in Japan, but it changed the playing field completely because the pilots, these 3 children that can only the children can synchronize with the machines, then go into depression. It was a series that deliberately forgot about its initial fights of mankind versus enemies, and we actually follow the children, the adolescents, into the recesses of their psyches, and they're shutting off from the world and their mental problems. So in the end, it's a series that has wonderful robot and character design by Yoshimoto Sadayuki, who has also worked with Hosoda Mamoru and many other famous directors. But also we had a psychological robot anime, which is something that had never been done before at the time. The closest thing was Gundam, but it was nothing comparable to this. So it is a series that deals with psychological themes, isolation, hikikomori, so shut-ins, people that do not really engage with society and mostly stay at home, relation with others, and so on and so forth. So I'm throwing a lot of things at you, I'm sorry, but I will focus on one. So from my interest in immediacy, Evangelion is very important because it showcases these adolescents that live in a society that is very obscure for them because they are not, we don't know anything about these aliens. We just know that we have to fight them. We don't know where they're coming from. And these children are basically just ordered to fight by the army. They're not given explanations. They're not seen in their entirety as human beings. The main character, Shinji, is summoned by his father, who rules this, who is one of the important people in this military organization. And he only needs his son just to fight. There is not like any fatherly warmth after that. So in this world, in this society where we don't know if we ever going to have a solution, the adolescents, the pilots, they have to control and pilot the robots just to survive, just to continuously follow orders, just to continuously save the world, just to continuously do what they're told. This is their only function. If they start expressing doubts about their mission, because they could die, right? The society does not accept them anymore. They're useless, right? So they live in a world of immediacy that never changes because they will never achieve a final victory, right? So the main character, Shinji, shuts himself off and he decides not to pilot the Eva anymore, the Evangelion, the robot, or android, right? He escapes into his interiority, and he indulges in his solipsistic fantasies of harming himself, not physically, but telling himself that he is useless, right? Nobody needs him. And for sure, his father is not going to tell him, I love you, right? And so the series is important for many things, but it is something that articulates immediately wonderfully. And I wanted to show a clip of when Shinji first pilots the Eva. Let's pay attention to what his father says. Okay, I hope the subtitles are good. Okay, so I think this is from the very first episode. I think it speaks volumes to the relationship, right? So Shinji is summoned out of the blue from his estranged father. His father says, we need you for this. If you cannot do it, leave, right? So you can see that is immediacy at its best or worst, I guess, because it is the complexity of a human being, of Shinji, is reduced to only his instrumentalization, to how useful he can be for a mission that will be repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. I'm not going to go into speaking about the finale of the series, but Shinji then at one point, he will flee from this never-ending cycle, and he will escape into his own interiority, as I said a second ago. So in the end of the first, I will talk about the finale. I said I wouldn't, but I have to. The final two episodes of the series, episode 25 and 26, are very, very controversial because they take a completely different direction from what had been going on before. We drop the plot, the horizontal plot, and we see Shinji that is in a sort of theater with projections of faces of characters he knows that talk to him. but it's basically his trip in his mind, right? And it's also very experimental from a media studies point of view, and there is more detail about that in my book, and also there are studies on the specific cell bank techniques in the animation of the final 2 episodes. Many fans didn't like them because they thought they had been ripped off, so they protested, and Anno, the director, and the people at the studio decided to make another ending the following year, and they released it in the cinema. And I prefer the original ending because there is a message of growth. So through this self-reflection, Shinji in the end finds a way to coexist with his community. He accepts himself for what he is, that even if he is not perfect, even if he is not the one that his father wants, that the other wants, he still is himself. So he gets to this recognition, and at the end, when he realizes this, the veil of the curtain of this theater stage he was in is destroyed, and then he finds all the other characters. We don't know if they're really there or not, but they all clap him and say, congratulations, come detto, congratulations, and then the series ends. I think it's a beautiful ending. There is hope there because it is through reestablishing yourself, not only as yourself, but as yourself within a wider circle of a community that you can escape this never-ending cycle of immediacy. The other example that I have is the anime series Psycho-Pass. Psycho-Pass is what we would call media mix. So it's something like started as an anime, but then became also had sequels, then there were movies, then there were video games, then there were light novels. So it's a big media series, and there have been movies and other iterations. But the more interesting and intellectually challenging one is the first series that was aired in 2012, 2013. I know I said that my scope is until 2011, but Psycho-Pass was actually made before 2012, but it was there afterwards, because since it shows a very problematic Japan, it was a bit difficult to air it right after Fukushima, right? So Psycho-Pass is a very beautiful series. I really recommend it if you haven't seen it. It is a dystopian show written by Urobuchi Gen of Nitro Prasu. It's a group of writers of very dark things and very interesting things. It imagines Japan 100 years in the future. Japan has become autarkic. They don't import anything. They produce everything on their own soil. And thanks to this, the population has decreased by almost 9/10. So there are not many Japanese. But they have also achieved a crime-free society, because through a sort of Orwellian Big Brother system that is called Sibyl system, from the Sibyl, you know, the clairvoyant, the seer in mythology, from Kuma. The system is able, this big think tank of electronic brains in the government, scan everybody at their birth, and they are able to assess what everybody is good at and the potential they will achieve in life. So if everybody is assigned to the most appropriate job and to the most appropriate partner, tekizai, tekisho in Japanese, the appropriate place for appropriate characteristics, right? So on the one hand, this is a perfect society because there is no frustration with relationships, there is no frustration with work, but also there is no crime. Crime has been defeated. It is indebted in a way from dystopic narratives such as Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, Philip K. Dick, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or The Minority Report. Because like the precogs in Philip K. Dick's, the Sibyl system is able to analyze the stress factors of a person, what is called a psychopath, and assign it a score. So if somebody has a psychopath that skyrockets, it means that they are very likely, they're under duress, and they're very likely to commit a crime. So in that case, the police can apprehend them before they commit the crime. So the crime has plummeted in Japan, right? It's a perfect society, right? No, the reality is not so simple, of course, because the people in the psychopath world, they live under the suspension of thought. Because if there is a system that already gives you all the answers, it means that you don't want to think about the rules, you don't want to think about the gray areas between the spots, you don't question anything normally. People decide not to think, and those that think realize that the Japanese have submitted their capacity to think for the promise of a stable society. So this is this utopian, dystopian narrative, right? We know that many utopian narratives always have a dark side. So it's always the two sides of the same coin. So I had a video clip, but I think maybe I should move on. I don't know. Do you want to see the video? Okay. Okay, sorry, to give you a context. So Psychopaths in the end is a police story, right? The main narrative follows the people of the crime apprehension unit of the bureau. So we have the main inspector, Akane Tsunemori, who is a newly appointed officer, who is paired with Inspector Kogami, who is an enforcer. No, sorry, Akane is an inspector. She's paired with enforcer Shikokan Kogami, who used to be an inspector, but he had a crisis. So because a friend of his had been murdered, so his psychopath went through the roof. He was considered a perilous individual, and he was demoted to enforcer. So Akane and Shinya Kogami and Tsunemori, they develop a bond, could be sentimental, but we never see anything. But they start questioning things, right? They represent two sides of the same coin, questioning things. And this is a dialogue between them. Okay, so I think this dialogue is very emblematic of people that try to see society and ask themselves questions, right? Because the Japanese in Psychopaths, they decided voluntarily to sacrifice their capacity for discernment to live without crime and to live without worrying about things, right? Worrying about the job, relationships, and things like that. So there is a price to pay, the price for freedom. So they live in a constant presentism, because if you don't think about your roles, you never envision change. If a system always tells you what to do, you don't think about what you want to do. So you suspend thinking about your life, and life becomes like a repetition of instance. It never changes, right? It's repetitive. There are, however, reactions to the system in the story. One side of the coin is the mastermind, the evil, the enemy of the fiend of the first series, who is Makishima Shogo, the one on the right. Makishima is what we would call a trickster, a liminal figure that is in between things, because he was born with an anomaly. He's called a system anomaly, because whatever he does, his score is always zero. Even if he kills somebody on the street, Sibyl system will always scan him and have zero. So in order for this power of his, he wants to destroy the system and question it. So Makishima constantly provokes crimes, instigating free will in his victims. He plots things. He wants to take the system down. So he is, in a way, what we would call a free thinker, because he tries to challenge the system, see how far he can go, and he's trying to what we would call create a concrete utopia in utopian studies, because his concrete utopia is this small bubble of crime that manages to challenge Sibyl. So it's a utopia against the dystopia, even if it's an evil one. But it's still non-hegemonic, right? Because he cannot take the whole system down. He remains one criminal. So even in the series, we are even faced with a question of whether he does this because by being born outside of the system, he felt alone. He felt that he was somebody that didn't exist, because the system that classifies everything, wouldn't classify him. So out of loneliness, he became a murderous criminal, right, as one does. However, from the purpose of the analysis of immediacy, Makishima tries to break the cycles of immediacy because he tries to change, even through crimes. He exerts critical thinking. He wants to question the system. He wants to take it down. However, he does not achieve the point of community because by destroying things, you don't build a community. You remain an isolated criminal. So in this way, he will create just a series of violence that also will not change society. So the series shows another way to break free of the cycles of a pre-ordered, preset society that is embodied by Tsunemori Akane, who is actually the one who finds a way to break the cycles of immediacy and find the community. Because in the end, she understands that Sibyl's system is bad. She does arrest and stop Makishima. No, Makishima is actually killed. But anyway, he's stopped. And she questions the system. She's aware that the system is wrong, but she does not destroy. She takes another approach, the approach of believing and betting on people, or believing in her fellow humans, that they will understand that as a community, people can start thinking more widely, and in the end, through this communitarian change, Sibyl will be destroyed. So it is what a concrete utopia, as Ruth Levitas would call it, that can become hegemonic. So the one by Makishima was destructive, so it could not become dominant, it could not become hegemonic, but the one that is more optimistic, it takes longer time, by Akane is. So we can see one of the final bits in the story where she faces the main brain of Sibyl. Okay, so this is the new way, the new communitarian way by Akane. So now I get to my final case study, which is the manga Shingeki no Kyojin, Attack on Titan, which ended publication, serialization, it ended in 2021. And it's a story that has changed many skins. Within the story, it starts as something that changes completely, but all very interesting. So to put it briefly again, it's a fantasy manga set in a sort of industrial, between medieval and industrial Europe, let's say, where humanity is constantly attacked by colossal creatures like the one you see on the left. As usual, we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know how they function mostly. We just know that they like to eat humans, right? And humanity is constantly and painstakingly trying to survive to their attacks because they're so strong. So every time they attack, even if humanity can repel them, there are always extreme losses, right? And I will stop there, my summary, because otherwise. So similar to Psychopaths, we have other images of a secluded community that only is concerned with what happens around them. And that is physically epitomized by 3 concentric walls of solid stone, and not only, but I will not give out spoilers, where humanity has entrenched itself. For 100 years, they haven't seen a Titan, so they live in their protected cage, and they have a sort of medieval society with a king and officers and so on and so forth. So the normal people, they do not think that the Titans will attack them again because they haven't attacked for 100 years. So they just live their life. They don't want to venture outside in the world and see what is out there, if there are more Titans. However, there is an exception, which is the one given by the Survey Corps, the militaries who actually go outside, scout the land, and try to kill the Titans. Chosa Heidan in Japanese. So our protagonists, the main Eren and his friends, Mikasa, Arumin, and others, most of them have German-sounding names, are part of these Survey Corps. So the Survey Corps are the free thinkers in this situation, because they are not happy with living a life behind walls where life is always the same, a life you don't know what might happen, if titans may come, you don't care, you just live your own life. They want to know what is out there. They want to know if there is a chance to finally defeat the titans. And then, of course, the titans do come back after 100 years, right? And they wreak havoc and they kill a lot of people. It's a very brutal series, very impactful, but very worthwhile, in my opinion. So immediacy for a good deal of the manga is shown in the utter sense of desperation of the losing battles that the humans fight. Because, as I said, the titans are much more powerful than them. So every time these survey corps go out and try to defend themselves, they have huge losses every time. And even if they manage to kill one titan or two, or to survive, they know that it's never going to be a final victory. So they just survived another day, and again, and again, and again. You just have to fight every other day, otherwise you die. So this is a presentist cycle, right? So there is an emphasis that every time they face the titans, every time they face this terror, the time in which they are there, in which they find themselves, is the ima, the now that equates to their whole life. Their whole life is a series of present times where they have to survive another day. If you can read the Japanese here, the commander says, so now is the time that decides the fate of the extinction or survival of mankind. And this is repeated over and over and over. And even a huge battle, for the most part of the manga, will only, if successful, will only amount to survival for one day, right? So it is a presentist, never-ending life that they live, where it can only survive once every year, every time, once every day. Another part of immediacy refers to stimulation, because reading the manga more than in an anime, in my view, you see the titans that are so powerful, that they are so vicious, that you really hate them. So that when the humanity somehow manages to fight them back, there is a sort of release of tension even in the reader. And the writer of the manga exploits this very well. So he has been criticized because he doesn't draw very well. Many readers don't like the manga because they say it's very ugly and they prefer the anime. I actually think that the manga is also very good in its own aesthetics. You need to get used to that, but after you do, I think it's very nice. So here you see the titans, and you see the panels that are splash pages. They're very long drawings, very big, that detail every moment when our main guy, Eren, who transforms into a titan, can fight the armored titan back. And we see the details like in slow motion. Each panel is detailing his punch that is finally striking him like the whole of humanity. And when you read these things, you have a sort of catharsis in a way, right? Like in tragedy. Through this violence against the titans, as a reader, you're also released from this lump, and you respond to a corporeal stimulation like the characters do. So that is also an immediate release of tension. But even for the reader, you know that it's not going to amount to anything because the titans will come again, right? So it's a double-edged sword. My final point is about the other part of the series, because if you are familiar with the series, you know that it changes a lot, like it molds, right, like a snake. And in the other part of the series, we know actually everything about how their world is constructed. We know where the titans are coming from, and we see that there is actually a history of violence and martyrdom, that the humanity that is entrenched in the walls, their ancestors actually were evil people that submitted another population who actually now keeps them at bay through the titans. So the details can be confusing, but what I would like you to take home is that the manga shows us that the categories of good and evil depend on the perspectives and the way of what we see in front of us. So people that live in the immediacy of their secluded world will never have the full picture, because what you think is the enemy might actually be a friend for another person, right? So even that is, the manga there shows what the suspension of thought of only looking at what is in front of you in immediacy is something that reduces the complexity of reality, because perpetrators and victims are concepts that actually can apply to different contexts, right? So there is a human depth in Shingeki no Kyojin that shows that understanding is something that is very complex, and it can surpass labels that we use for immediate reverence, right? That is ugly, that is beautiful, that is an enemy, that is stupid, right? And so if we go through free thinking beyond that, there are other answers. Of course, it's very difficult, right, to do that, but it's a way, the only possible way to finally achieve a further comprehension and escape the cycles of immediacy that is based on hatred. So the main character, Eren, in the end, he's the protagonist, but then he also becomes the evil person, and in the end, we find that he did that to save his friends. I will not give you the details because otherwise it would take me another hour. But in the end, the manga is a bit open about his real responsibility, what he really wanted to do, or if he had everything under control. So his may be a sacrifice, he may be evil, because that sacrifice, even to save his friends, comes at a very high price. But what is important for the purposes of the book, of my analysis, is that it shows there are different perspectives, right? That if we only go on perpetrating violence and believing a history of hatred and violence, we will never change reality. We will always be stuck in something that is a never-ending cycle of violence. So these were my examples for today. As the conclusions for this chapter, but for the book more in general, in my book, I hope to show that there are recurring traits that combine suspension of thought, procurement of violence stimulation, violence, that can all be traced back to an emphasis on immediacy that is recurring across many works, across many artists, across many ways of thinking in contemporary culture. And at the end of the day, all of these characteristics boil down to a disconnection from others. These are stories of isolation that somehow can provoke a feeling in the readers, in the viewers, to think about human bonds and interpersonal ties with others, trying to achieve other mutual understandings. So, because our feelings do not only belong to us, right? They also belong to those that come in our lives. So, as a contribution to the broader field of studies, the book hopes to provide another model of analysis that can be applied to other works that are contemporaneous, but not necessarily so, that where sudden violence can also be seen through the lens of the decay and the decadence of clear-cut perceptions of time, issues of temporality, and the effacement of clear-cut categories of the past and the future. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very inspiring. Everybody is still here, obviously.
For the videos.
For the videos and other things as well, of course. So let me start us off before we open to the floor. So when I read Immediacy, I immediately thought this would be, I mean, you talked a lot about the meaning of immediacy within the worlds of the works that you've chosen. But I wonder about the mechanics of immediacy as well. So obviously, as you've just shown in the Attack of the Titans, there's something very different going on when you have visuals. But in written text, is there any kind of rhetoric strategy that is used to sort of present this? Clearly, the question is not that. Is there a way to that the writing itself, that there is a kind of a rhetoric strategy that produces a sense of this owarinaki nichijou?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question. So the short answer is sex. So
Right.
basically,
Always good.
it's in much of the literature that is in the book, sex, also violence, but the response to sexual stimulation, often what we would call probably meaningless sex, like even animalistic, is the perfect example of something that is very carnal and bodily. So it's a bodily stimulation. You react to that because you have the chance. And if memory serves me right, in none of the sexual intercourses that are in these books, there is a mutual satisfaction of understanding. We never have characters that fall in love afterwards or even before. It's only in Takahashi, this is brought to the extreme because we have people that somehow start thinking about incest, or a child that finds the videos in his house of the porn movies where his mother was. So he watches the movies with his mother, that his mother is engaging in the porn movie. So it's always something carnal for releasing an urge that you have. Even in Taguchi Randi, the sex that the main character Yuki has is always with her previous mentor, and they have a bondage SMS relationship. So it's never love. It's always like, I don't know, it reminds me of Kono Taiko's works, right? Kono Taiko is a different temporal setting than this, but if you have read, God, now escapes my mind, Yoshigari, right? Toddler hunting, it's that kind of sex, right? Devious and stuff like that, right? So, and even in Hirano, because the story that I worked on is about two first online artists of sex in public places, people that record themselves while having sex. So I would say that is always the first point of contact. And in Takahashi, we also have postmodernity. So there is sex and there is also a change in reality. So his characters walk in the room, and then they find somebody that has the head of Yoda from Star Wars, right? So I would say that these are the two main ways, right?
Thank you very much. Right, open up to the floor. Yes, please, over here, and then over there.
I think Filippo, presentation. It's more like a comment rather than a question. But this immediacy, like stuck in a horrible. It's not like stuck in a nice, pleasant reality.
No,
it's more like it's like a punishment. So it's actually reminded me of the Greek mythology, the Potones.
Prometheus.
Yeah, that's it.
The one who stole fire.
Yeah. But the guy whose organs been eaten every day.
Yeah, it's him. He was tied to a rock with a raven or an eagle, I think.
Titan.
He was a titan. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So it just reminded me of that.
Yeah, there is.
It's this immediacy is just so horrible, but at the same time you expect the same thing, so it's comfortable in the sense that you know what to expect. It's horrible nonetheless. So
yeah, no, exactly. You hit it in the head because it is often, with sex, it can also be pleasant in a way, but it's also something that eats at you in a way because you lose some part of your humanity. But it's also, as you say, comfortable because there is a certain attraction to not thinking about things, right? Not to completely, pull the plug on your thoughts. However, in all of these books, we always find the discomfort, right? It never, for people in the books that live in immediacy, it doesn't usually end well. I have found in my research that the anime and manga, maybe by virtue of their media, they are a bit more propositive in terms of escaping for immediacy. Like, I think more or less the manga and anime that I talked about today have a positive ending, more or less. Thousands die, but more or less it's a positive ending. Whereas in the novels, not usually, only in one, we have a person that somehow finds a balance. In Takahashi, not really. So it is not horrible in the sense that it's always suffering, but in a way, yes, you lose something of yourself, and it's a situation that is unsustainable after a while.
Thank you. Yes, you're there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Filippo. I wanted to ask a little more about the motif of family, which you mentioned,
Yeah.
particularly with the father in Evangelion, which you were examining. But it struck me as well that in the contemporary literature that you look at, the inheritance of your fathers or the responsibility of your children is something that is missing in a lot of contemporary Japanese literature. Murata Sayaka, Yakiemi, Murakami Yu, and other ones came to mind. And I wondered, in your work, have you come across further understanding of why? Why is the family suddenly broken in this immediacy?
Thank you. So, from one point of view, in many of the works that I discuss, we don't really have presences of families. Like usually in the novels, there is not really a lot of that. I think off the top of my head, in Hirano's story, there's a bit more, but it's mostly about one of the duo that is Roshutsukyo, so like their exhibitionists on internet. She didn't have that great of a childhood because she had difficult, like non-standard feelings about her body at the time with menstruation and so on. She didn't really have anyone to turn to. I think it also might have to do with the fact that many of the narratives that I analyze were written in the 90s and also or early 2000s. So we have authors that also grew up in what is often called Chichinaki Shakai, right? So the generations that are fatherless in Japan because the father was always working, right? So so it's a convention, right? But many of the families portrayed in these stories come from there, and even Angel Kosai, right? So if you think about some representations of Angel Kosai, these girls engage in those practices because somehow they felt that nobody at home would listen to them. And even many of the young people that were recruited by Omu Shinrikyo were affluent youngsters who were part of these so-called lost generations, and they didn't have guidance. And often they said they thought they didn't find models in society, right? So usually the families are absent here. They're not really discussed, their absence. They're not even thought about a possible point of contact. So the characters don't say, I'll talk to my father, oh, it was useless. No, they don't even think that to begin with. So it's part of it. Like it resonates also with the dysfunctional families a lot, right? So
Yes. Anybody else? There's a question online here from Jason Yu. How would you apply the framework of immediacy on Murakami Haruki, whose text, for example, Hardboiled Wonderland and The End of the World, influenced the formation of Seikiyuke and a generation of anime creators?
Thank you. Seikiyuke, is that Sekai or no?
Probably.
Okay. Okay, well, it's a very, very, very complex question. So I am not an expert on Murakami Haruki, unfortunately, but I would say that so in sometimes Murakami's production that comprehends some of the texts that you mentioned, but also the Wind Up Burn Chronicle, is seen as a more engaged Murakami Haruki. And the time that he starts doing that, often he engages with the legacy of the fathers. So even in the war of his grandfather. So that touches on what you were saying. But I think Murakami Haruki, so he is not part of the lost generation. So he started writing in a time where, let's say, things were still working more or less economically, let's say. So, but I think Murakami Haruki feels in a way that there is a generational burden on the people of his generation that somehow did not prepare the young or those that came afterwards to live in a society, let's say, in the same way. So some of his narratives deal a lot with loneliness. So loneliness is connatural, consubstantial with immediacy, I would say. So I think that he influenced that mostly in terms of isolation. Also, Uno Tsunehiro makes an example in his book Little People no Zidai, which the age of little people, which in the end is a big study on Murakami Haruki and Kamen Rider. So two sides of the coin, right? And he discusses one short story, I think, which is called Kaeru wa Sekai o Suku, I think. Kaeru-kun Sekai wa Suku. So little frog saves the world. And it says that behind many of Japan's disasters, I'm citing for memory, I hope I'm not wrong, there is a monster lurking, and whenever this monster does something, there is an earthquake or something. So it's showing that many things happen without a reason, right? So, and that way also, I think, in a way, is similar to Sekai Kei. So Sekai Kei is this construction of narratives in popular media, whereas the very small story of two people romance or something like that is seen, basically equates the end of the world. So if two people can be together or resolve their issues, then also the world will be saved. I'm super simplifying this, but this is basically how many posit that. So in a way, I think Murakami Haruki does not enforce narratives of immediacy that much, but he shows that sometimes reality can be very ever so small and reduced in complexity, and this generates loneliness. I hope it's a kind of an answer, but I'm not super knowledgeable about Murakami Haruki.
Thank you. Yes. Any final questions? Yes.
I suppose sort of going on from in psychopaths.
Yeah.
But they're crime and punishment. I suppose what I wanted to ask is like in the normal world as we see it, like prison time is sort of like taking away certain people's time in the future and sort of punishment for their crimes. But how in terms of the immediacy, where worlds are, there is no future for certain people. How do they deal with punishing people? Like if you can't take away part of their future, or if there is no future to look forward to, how does in this framework, how do they deal with crimes and how to punish people?
Do you mean in psychopaths?
Just in general, I would say.
I think they don't care. That would be my very short answer, because in narratives such as psychopaths, both those that are ruled upon and those that rule and decide things, I think they both live in two different ways. They still live in immediacy, because those that are regulated, they are told what to do. As you say, they are in psychopaths, for example, they are robbed of their future. But those in power don't really care about that. They just want to maintain power and consensus, not doing something great for the people, but just a way to maintain power and go on with their life. So in Attack on Titan, I think this is evident when there is a civil movement and they they upend the status quo and they chase away the fake king. Then they find the real king, Rod Rice, and they install another king. So these families, they had been ruling the world under lies. They deprived the people of their sense of history. They told them a very fake history, and they don't want people to know. So they don't care about robbing them of their future, because if you're robbing them of the past, you're also robbing somebody of the future. Because if we don't know where we're coming from, it's also very hard that we know where we're going. So my short answer would be that even the rulers think of people only in terms of numbers. They only need them to be quiet in order to maintain their power. But even their power is not aimed at grand innovations or grand changes. It's not like, I'm keeping you quiet, but I'm such an enlightened leader, I know what I'm doing. No, I just want to be on my seat for as long as it any parallels with contemporary society are, I don't know, volunteer.
Thank you. Yes, so three more, Lucia, Tihiro, and then Ina.
I think I have a question.
Yes.
First of all, thank you. This was very insightful. From where I come from, it was also a revelation because immediacy in the broadly Buddhist world that Japan is supposed to represent is actually very positive and it is considered to be the climax of the Buddhist journey to understanding the present as having the fullness of past and future inside these words. So it was very interesting to think of a present that is rather deprived of this fullness. And when you speak about the moment, about time being just a moment per se, in fact, I just said it today in class that moment is so fundamental in time in most of what we can say is Japanese Buddhism is a succession of these moments that are very meaningful one by one. So the fact, well, the story that you have told us is another example maybe that Japanese have forgotten about everything.
Yeah, the Buddhist.
Interesting, and it is interesting to think of the extent to which scholarship, Japanese scholarship, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, was emphasizing this present in positive ways, not in a passive way as it seems coming out from your characters, but in a very and from the critics that have written, which was very interesting. But in terms of maybe possibility that was not projected into the future, but it was into the present. So that was kind of interesting to think back. I don't know the reason. I never thought about the reasons, but it's something that. And then a question I have. I'm very fond of Murakami Takashi.
The art, yeah.
And you put it together together with other critics or other writers who were thinking, if I remember well, you said something about their focus on the present. But Takahashi is full. Murakami is full of history. His last exhibition, it was spectacular in the way in which he uses insights from mostly the religious historical environment of Kyoto. It was something in Kyoto was very special last year. So I wonder whether there isn't more to labels such as super flat or.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course, today I couldn't really say much about Murakami Takashi. So in my work, I have dealt with his manifesto of superflat mostly. So I have dealt with that because what I found that was very interesting was his idea at the base of superflat that somehow in Japan, high and low culture for him that don't really exist. So that's why, his superflat is famous for making arts objects out of characters and things like that. I'm super simplifying. But so that in his manifesto and his writings and interviews that I worked on for the book, he basically says things that are comparable to, for example, other art historians in Japan or critics such as Sawara Ginoi that say that Japan doesn't really have a post-war art history because sometimes things were never discussed with a very longue durée, right, in a very long and comprehensive view of history, but they were just reconstructed through their own immediate context. So I'm not agreeing with these theories necessarily, but in the chapter, I worked with these theories to show that phenomena of immediacy are being discussed in Japan. And Murakami Takashi in Superflat basically is making creations that somehow are coalescing in only one amalgam that doesn't have clear-cut categories. So they coexist. So a past tradition of pop culture together with the present creates something that is at the same time immanent but relevant of history. So it was converged dimension that where these orders of time were not clearly demarcated. And that did resonate with immediacy, not the rest of Murakami's work. So that is how I read Superflat. And a certain very minute part of Japanese art criticism.
Thank you. Yes. Chihiro.
Because as someone who's working with sex workers, interviewing sex workers, he's quite like famous or influential person. And then also my experience in Japan, like when I talk to sex workers and ask them like, oh, like what's your experiences like working with researchers, and then they mention that when they are asked by a researcher like about future or like their past, they got really angry and they said like, oh, like I don't like answering the question, especially about the future, like how are you going to survive like with this work. And so my question is just, I was just curious, like why you departed him when you talk about this thing. And yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I mean, of course, Miyadai has written many things, and actually, one of the most recent scholarly sources on Attack on Titan that I found during fieldwork, graciously funded by the Japan Foundation. I read a book by Miyadai Shinji, an essay collection on Attack on Titan. So he's everywhere, right? So of course, in my book, I deal with this theory of his and another one. So I don't deal with the entirety of his work. However, when you work on 1995 ideas of presentism, idea of extended phases of time and perception of the present, you have to work through. You have to deal with his stuff. So there was no way to, by hook or by crook, I had to. It's a very important theory at the time, right? It's like when you work on otaku studies, it's really hard not to mention Azuma Hiroki or things like that. And Miyadai's ideas of, and he became famous for that, like with Owarinaki Nichijo, he was his breakthrough. So there are interesting things to see how he theorized this need to somehow survive an endless reality that were birthed right in the aftermath of Om Shinrikyo, sarin gas attacks and things like that. So that was what was most instrumental for my work.
Thank you. Finally, yeah.
Very quick. It's actually, my question was sort of asked, I was also thinking about the positive aspect of immediacy and the present. And building on that thought as well, are there others engaging with, for example, nature? Because nature can be seen as repetitive, but it's always the same but not the same, or whether it's necessarily the belief from immediacy is always violence and sex, or authors seeking some kind of other positive engagement for that.
That's very interesting. Thank you. So in the narratives that I researched and others that I researched and didn't make it into the book, nature does not really play a big role. So all narratives in the book in different media, they are almost all of them are very urban. They are very technological. They're very much rooted in the urban landscape of people, chaotic life. And there is one example, though, that comes to my mind. It is Outlet by Taguchi Randi, because I have a section in the book on Consento, the novel by Taguchi Randi, which is actually part of a trilogy, Consento, Antenna, and Mosaic. And they are part of this, I wouldn't call it phase, because Taguchi is still dabbling with those matters, of her more spiritual phase, more shamanistic. So Outlet also deals a lot with shamanism in its fiction. So there is this idea that somehow we are cooped up in our own small urban reality, which is also the one where the protagonist is shackled. But if we find a way to connect our experiences with the wider nature, that somehow is seen as a very positive thing, because nature is a sort of magic place that puts us in contact with a wider community that we can achieve through spiritualism. So that's probably the only instance of nature that I have found in my research. And the other two novels in the trilogy are more and more about the protagonists becoming sort of shamans. And actually, a colleague of mine who did her work in Italy on actually shamans in contemporary Japan, when dealing with literature, she worked on Taguchi Randi. So her works have also been studied from that point of view. But in my work, it's the only reference to nature that I have found in Immediacy. Immediacy doesn't like nature much. It likes hard concrete.
Concrete, yes. Well, wonderful way to end. Well, thank you very much. Give a huge round of applause.
Thank you.